Hello guys, welcome to Artificial and Facts channel. So in this video, we're going to talk about the investment demand curve. But before we talk about the investment demand curve, here are some explanation about what is investment. So, investment is an important 16% of GDP. Because remember, GDP equals to C plus I plus G plus NX, which is consumer expenditures on durable goods, non-durable goods, and services. Gross business investment, which we are going to discuss here in detail, the component I, and the government spending and the exports. So the gross business investment, the I component of GDP, refers to the demand by businesses for physical capital goods and services used to maintain or expand its operations. Think of it as the office and factory space, machinery, computers, and so on that are used to operate a business. It is important to remember that investment demand here does not refer to financial investment, because financial investment is a form of saving, typically by households that wish to maintain or increase their wealth by the varying consumption till a later time. So these are business or firms borrow to spend money on. There are new plants or factories, capital equipment or machinery, technology, which is hardware and software, new homes, and inventories or goods sold by producers, including unsold goods. So, investment is the driving force for all economic activity because investment is the catalyst for the economic activity. You get to think about the relationship between a business purchasing a large machine and the economic effects on such an investment, right? An example, if a business decides it's worth their profitable interest to spend $5 million upgrading or replacing a machine they figure, there's gonna be a significant usage of that machine, which means the company that builds the machine is gonna receive more orders, which means employment tied to the usage and distribution of the goods and services associated with that machine will increase. So that's why investment also is a leading economic indicator. Because if you look at investment as a percentage of GDP, which means 16%, and you tie it to the business cycle, anytime business investment falters will cause a recession. And the longer investment spending wanes, the longer the recession will last. So, investment is the decision of a firm to spend money on or expenditure on new machinery or construction is simply a decision based on marginal benefits and marginal cost. So, the marginal benefit is the expected real rate of return, or R, the firm anticipates receiving on the expenditure, and the marginal cost of this investment is the real rate of interest, the I, or the cost of borrowing. So that's a review of investment and why investment is such an important component of GDP. Although it's only 16% of GDP, it's a driving force behind business cycle. Here are the expected rates of return, which is the expected profit. And here there are 3 steps of expected rates of return. Step 1 is the cost or benefit, Analysis to make investment decisions. Step 2 is to assess the expected rate of return to determine the benefits. And step 3 is to count the cost by the interest cost. And this is an important question. How do businesses make investment spending decisions? So, in other words, we compare the profit, which is the expected rate of return, we donated as R here in the video, compare with the cost, which is the real interest rate, keeping in mind that the real investment rate is the nominal interest rate adjusted for inflation, which is donated as I here in the video. As you guys can see, the real interest rate. So we compare the expected rate of return and the real interest rate. And so to make it clear, any proposed investment spending is going to be judged by looking at its expected profit, which is the expected rate of return here. And what are we looking here is what are we expecting to earn from some proposed capital equipment purchase, and what is it gonna cost to buy that capital, which will normally measure using the real interest rate. So the company compares that expected rate of return, the profit, to the real interest rate, the cost of buying the capital. And if the profits, the expected rate of return is greater, the R is greater, then they should undertake that investment spending. Why? Because that investment spending will yield to them more profit than if they don't undertake that investment spending. But if the profit or the expected rate of return, the R, is less than the real interest rate, I, in other words, the expected profit are less than what is going to cost to buy the capital, well, in that case, you don't want to undertake that investment spending. Why? Because undertaking that investment spending will actually decrease your profits, which is not what a business intends to do or want to do. Because some possible investment projects are likely to earn high expected rates of return compared to the real interest rate, and others are expected to earn low rates of return. So there is an inverse relationship between investment spending and the real interest rates. Simply put, some investment spending is only going to be profitable when the real interest rate is low. And when the real interest is high, those opportunities are not as likely and there will be less investment spending. The rational firms invest in all projects up to the point where the real rate of interest equals to the expected real rate of return. So I equals to R. Very few investment projects are available at extremely high rates of return, and so those opportunities are taken first. Now we can see this more clearly if we go ahead to the investment demand curve. So here is the investment demand curve. The quantity demanded increases as the price falls. The same is true for investment demand. This vertical axis is going to be real interest rate, which I tend to abbreviate as RIR here. And those horizontal axis is going to be investment spending, which I will indicate with a capital I here, the horizontal axis. The investment demand curve is a downward sloping line, and it is a demand curve after all. This shows us that at the high interest rate, we will call this RIR1. At that relatively high interest rate, notice that what result is a relative low level of investment spending. But if we decrease the real interest rate to RIR2, notice that the level of investment spending is going to increase to I2. So here at this relative high interest rate, notice that the result is a relatively low level of investment spending, as you guys can see in I1. But if we decrease the real interest rate to RIR2, notice that the level of investment spending is going to increase to I2. Changes in RIR cause changes in I. Factors other than R may shift the entire ID curve. So factors other than R may shift the entire investment demand curve. Now, once again, remember that this is I, this I in the C plus I plus G plus NX equals to GDP formula, the expenditure approach to calculating GDP. What this means is when we have higher interest rates, investment spending is going to tend to be lower. That means the capital I is lower and real GDP is lower, so the tendency is for high real interest rates to I in the GDP formula is lead to lower level of output, whereas at the same time lower levels of the real interest rate lead to greater investment spending, and so lower RIR is lead to higher levels of output, higher GDP. So in this, investment is the formula of GDP. So if in investment, the higher the RIR means the lower GDP, and the lower RIR in investment is the higher GDP. Next is the shift of the investment demand. Now nicely, shifts of the investment demand curve, which again we're still talking about demand, special form of demand, but luckily it's fairly straightforward because it largely does the same things that you expected from market demand. And so here our shift of the investment demand curve, when we talk about the shift, just like in market demand, a leftward shift of the investment curve, which is ID2 here, is a decrease in investment demand. And a rightward shift of the investment demand curve, which is ID3 here, is an increase in investment demand. And when investment demand shifts, different levels of gross private investment occur even while RIR remains constant. So when investment demand shifts, different level of gross private investment occur even while RIR remains constant. So that's all guys for this video about investment demand curve. Thank you so much for watching. Please kindly like, comment, and also share, and please don't forget to subscribe to this channel. Thank you. Bye.